Welcome to Pod by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Kwesi Kunadu. On this episode, we are going to talk about feeding the spirit. And by feeding the spirit, what I'm referring to is several layers of meaning. The first layer of meaning refers to feeding your own spirit or your own soul. And in a moment, I get into why we should do that, what did that entail, and of course the consequences of not doing so, especially on a periodic or regular basis. And then there are other spiritual forces and figures that inhabit our world, our cosmos, that also need to be fed. And I'll explain also how to do so, give you some examples of what to do as well as why and the consequences thereof. And so let's start with feeding your own spirit. You see, the spirit, much like our human bodies, has to have enough nutrients in order to continue to do the work that it came here to do. Much like the engine of a car needs to be fueled, much like young babies need to be fed, much like adults need to be fed, we have to have a way in which to nourish, replenish, and sustain the energy that is the spirit and soul in us. And so likewise, it often goes unnoticed in this way. Imagine that we human beings spend so much time at the gym working on toning, buffing, and enlarging our muscles, and spend so little time on doing the same for our spirits. Think about that. We spend a lot of time on decorating the body, makeup, fashion, you name it, and spend so little comparative time on nourishing and outfitting the spirit. And so what I want to focus on is neglected area that is most important part of our human being. Not our mind, not our physical bodies, but our spirits and our souls. And so each of us belong to a culture, a human culture, right? A group. And so I'll use the Akan culture that my people belong to, at least half of my folks belong to, as one frame of reference for us. Now, among the Akan peoples, we usually have a calendar called the Adadja Name. And on this calendar, every 42 days, in a perpetual cycle, we have a moment where we feed our ancestral spirits. We have a moment where we feed on the calendar the spiritual forces found in nature and, of course, in the cosmos and universe. And there are moments in which we feed our own personal souls and spirits. The spirit in the Akan Chi language is referred to as Sun Sun, whereas the soul is referred to as Okra. And so the Kra of the soul and the Sun Sun of the spirit, these two major components of our whole human being has to be ritually cleansed and fed. And so some of us may do ritual cleaning in terms of medicine bath and other kinds of ritual bath. But again, one of the neglected portions of self-care for our being, our full human being, is feeding the spirit and the soul. So how do we do that? According to the Akan peoples, the way we do that is that on the day in which we are born, that is the day in which our spirit and our soul arrived on this earth from the Creator, right? From this God force, on that particular day. So I'm born on a Sunday. So on a Sunday, on Kwesiada or Sunday, but a particular Sunday. So I'm born on Munu Kwesi, which is a fresh new Sunday. On that Sunday, Munu Kwesi, every 42 days, I will have to go by a sacred river or stream or body of water, because one of my elements, strong elements, is water. And as such, I must also make sure I wear entire white, a symbol and a sign of being sacred and being holy. And so dress in white, make sure I've cleansed, make sure I fast, make sure that I fast from meats, make sure I fast from sex and other kinds of foods or activities that would drain your energy. Because what you want to do is what? Bring up and maximize and feed the energy. And so, of course, those activities will drain your energy. And so it takes at least a few days, if not a week, for meats like pork or beef and others to fully digest within our bodies. And that's is taking energy away from our body and from our being and our spirit and soul. Likewise, sexual intercourse. It takes and drains away energy from our being and soul. So this is why we abstain from those activities a few days prior to the bathing or cleansing of our soul and the feeding of our soul. And so on that day, we will bathe, in that sacred stream or body of water or river and cleanse ourselves. But that's only one part. The other part is feeding our soul. And so we can have a meal referred to as eto. And eto is usually a mixture of boiled eggs and yams, boiled yams. And the yams, depending upon which region you're in the nation state of Ghana, where the Akan people primarily reside, not solely, but primarily, then you would in fact use palm oil on some portions of the boiled up yams that you will then feed yourself with. In some cases, for example, in the Bona Techiman area, one simply uses, some people use shea butter, or some people just simply have the boiled up yams as they are prepared. And then they will have the eggs eaten. Some people put medicine, for example, black powder medicine referred to as moto, on the egg. So there's a number of ways in which to do this. But the main point that cuts across cultural and geographic line is that this ritual meal that was originally designed for the ancestral spirits and the forces found in nature can be used by individuals to feed their soul, particularly the egg, if one doesn't have yam around. And while eating the egg, one will say, me kradidi, me kradidi, me kradidi, my soul eat, my soul eat, my soul eat. So literally you are feeding the soul ritual food to strengthen it, to endear it, and to also make sure it is sustained and maintained until the next 42 days that it's time to refuel, right? And so feeding the soul and feeding the spirit is deeply important. The same is true if one wanted to feed ancestral spirits as well. There is a time and date in which to do so prescribed by this indigenous Akan calendar called Idajir 9. Now, there are also times beyond the calendar which one may feel their soul. That depends upon what they may see in their dreams. That may depend on one consult a spiritualist and a healer. They may also need to feed their soul, depending upon whatever disequilibrium or lack of stasis within their being, within their bodies. And that means they have to not only cleanse, ritually speaking, but also to feed, right? So feeding is the other coin of cleansing. We can cleanse all we want. We can fast, we can detox, but we also make sure we have nutritious foods and medicines and other kinds of nutrients within our bodies and within our full being. Now, there are ancestral forces that also need to be fed. And here's the consequence of not feeding them or feeding our own souls. The consequence is that for us, as the individual human beings and the families that we belong to, the communities we belong to, the consequence is that we become more weak and therefore vulnerable to outside forces. Yes, there's an African proverb that states in English translation that if the enemy within, right, is strong, the enemy without cannot get in. In other words, if you are fortified and strengthened from within, the microorganisms, the immaterial and spiritual forces that mean us no good and mean us harm and worse, they cannot penetrate and therefore do harm to us. And so that's the major consequence of not doing these rituals, of feeding our soul and our spirit on a periodic and continual basis. And according to the account calendar, these rituals are prescribed to happen every 42 days. And so having such a calendar gives us a template and sort of a guideline for these patterns of human activities over a period of time, that they're definite patterns of human activities because they repeat themselves over 42 days. For ancestral figures and forces, feeding them is also crucial because they too, they travel, they work. If they are proactive and positive in their lives, within your family life, they also need to energy, right, to do this kind of work. In other words, they need to have a vehicle to interface with our human world because they're of the spirit and they're pure. So why do we do, for example, blood sacrifices, whether it's of chickens, goats, cows, sheep? It's because blood within animal and human bodies carries oxygen, right? Carries spirit, right? This force of life. And likewise, when we offer a ritual blood sacrifice, it is offering life, but it's also offering this breath of life, right? This oxygen, this blood. And so blood is used as a conduit, as a medium, as a way essentially to get those purely spirits into our human world, interfacing with us in real ways. Because when we ask for their intercession, we ask for their intervention, when we ask for their assistance and support and guidance and their help, they need to have a way in which to make contact with and engage us through the offering of blood or the offering of certain food items. For example, there are spiritual forces that will accept certain foods and dishes. So for example, let's take the very popular Shango. So Shango has a ritual meal called amala, one of his favorites, right? Usually composed of pounded cassava, yams, or plantains mixed with a stew. In Brazil, they may add shrimp and other kinds of spices and peppers to it. Either way, this is a favorite food, that particular spiritual force, coming from the Yoruba Fombe people and roughly around the Nigeria region of West Africa. And so Shango is an example of a spiritual force that has particular meals that will appeal to the spirit, much like we have certain kinds of likings. For example, once upon a time, I used to love muffins, right? Bran muffins, my favorite. Raisin bran muffins, my favorite, right? And some reason that appealed to me for over years until I put it to the side about a decade ago. But up until then, I love raisin bran muffins for some reason, right? Likewise, these spiritual forces had their own likings, right? That is, they will do the work. They will come and sit with us, as you will. They will come and work on our behalf. But we have to find out what kinds of dishes and foods that feeds their spirit, that feeds their being, enables for us and to enable them to support and guide and help us, but also to allow them to interface with us in a way that is real, practical, and of course, ultimately productive, right? Now, there are other spiritual forces that will take, for example, water. They may take flowers. They may take, say, a drink like palm wine. Some may take palm oil with their meal. For example, there's a dish for Ogun, the Yoruba spiritual force, also falling among the Fombe people and others, that will like meals that prepare with palm oil, right, rather than palm wine. And there are others that prefer to have these European distilled liquors, for example, gins and snaps and so on. Whereas others may prefer different kinds of alcoholic beer, or they may prefer sodas and soft drinks, right? So all these different kinds of food and manufactured and natural food items depends on your relationship with these spiritual forces and figures, whether it is your spirit and soul, whether it is ancestral spirit and figure, or it's a spiritual force of nature. These all require and need to be fed. Again, what is the consequence? Imbalance. What is the consequence? Those forces that you and I were born with, because we're all born with at least one spiritual force to guide us. Think of it as a guardian spirit of sorts. And that force or forces, they are there to have our backs, right? They are there to have our fronts to see before we can see, and to check out our backs to make sure that any enemies or those that mean us harm and no good, they have the not only the back side, but have the front side of us as well. They too need to be fed. They need to do work, right? Because the same is true for healers. We have to feed our soul and our spirits because we have to pay for our eyesight, that is our ability to see, and to pay for our hearing, our ability to hear. Not that we see better or worse than other, so-called ordinary, regular human beings, but we see differently. And so we have to pay for these gifts, right? And so the spirits we work with, we have to feed them, right? And that may be not only food items, it could be non-food items. For example, some may like flowers, some may like rocks, and some may like, let's say, the trees that are behind me, some of the fruits from the trees behind me. Whatever it is that essentially is attuned or fixed to their particular spiritual likings, that's what you get and that's what you offer as a way to ensure that the connection between you and them is solid, but also that they can do the work that they were put there to do for you and for me and our behalf. Now, there's much more we can say about this, but the basic idea and takeaway is that we have to feed our own spirits, especially on a regular basis, to keep it in equilibrium, keep it balanced, but also to keep it well fortified to protect itself from outside and also inside forces that mean us harm. Secondly, we feed ancestral and forces of nature because they too play a part in this broader ecosystem, right? And in that ecosystem, what we seek is not control, what we seek balance. We seek to have equilibrium, right? We seek to have a place within the broader spectrum of living beings, right? And so feeding the soul is deeply important, deeply crucial. If you have any questions or concerns in terms of how to do so, what to do, where to do it, kindly put those questions and comments in the comment section below, or you can send me an email and I can reach out to you privately. Either way, hope you have enjoyed this episode powered by Nyame. I've been your guide and host for this episode. Hope to see you in another. Until then, stay well.